It's okay to say that maybe a little bit more stick to itiveness will allow you to go further. But more importantly, as a parent, now you can't just consider just you anymore. You have to consider your child, right? And shout out to all the men out there who made the sacrifice, even though some of them probably shouldn't have, same way some of you shouldn't, but some of y'all should have. Some of y'all, the best thing that y'all could have did was to stick it the fuck out because your child deserved that, right? Some of y'all ought to be the best thing that you do on this planet is by simply being there and creating an environment for your child to thrive in. Y'all think y'all finna be something else. You know what I'm saying? We got to start being a little bit more honest, a little bit, right? And so to answer this question simply, some of y'all do need to stay. You know what I'm saying? And I think far more of y'all need to stay than y'all leaving. You know what I'm saying? Yes, please leave if it's toxic, but y'all, I'm gonna leave it alone. Go ahead, Esther.
So it's actually interesting that you should mention the men's side of the house pertaining to this particular question, as far as that the men were staying in toxic relationships. And I'm going to say that the men were staying because it was comfortable for them to be in that toxic relationship, because most men won't leave if they're comfortable in it. And so that's why they're staying. So, for
Cap.
example, I'm going to say, for example, if there's, so one of the things that Yada pointed out was that the men can cheat, the men can do this, they can do that, they can be disrespectful, they can do a bunch of things, and the woman will stay. She'll forgive one time, she'll forgive twice, she'll forgive 3, 4, 5 times, and she'll stay. And then while the man may say, hey, the relationship was toxic because the woman failed to recognize her part, i.e., like the guy, I think Jay mentioned in a previous episode about some guy was talking about their karma, this woman karma. I don't know what your karma did, that I cheat on you all the time. So this is your karma, right? And it was a joke. But it's the fact that the woman may have contributed to why the guy may have had some type of culpability, even though at the end of the day, it was his choice to do that. But because she forgave, he stayed. So men are less likely to leave, not because they're doing it for the family, but because it's more comfortable for them to stay, particularly if the woman is constantly forgiving them for their actions, their transgressions or whatnot, or is more accepting of it. Now,
Cap.
on the woman's
Well, record
side,
says cap. I'll come back to that.
you can say cap all day, but at the end of the day, men didn't start complaining about women leaving until they realized they couldn't have multiple families, or they couldn't have these relationships on the other side of town. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, women are leaving too quickly. What about staying for the family? But I'm going to talk about that too. I would say the previous generations, right? Not going back to old time and all that good stuff, but the previous generation, i.e. the grandmothers and so forth, they actually were conditioned to sacrifice for the family's stability because they had to, right? But those same mothers or grandmothers told their daughters, hey, you're in different positions and you don't necessarily have to make those same sacrifices that I had to make. And this is probably leading to why women may leave quicker. They may forgive once or twice, but you also have those microwavable relationships where they're like, oh, nope, you did something one time wrong. I'm out. I'm bouncing because I already was warned that I shouldn't have to stay in a relationship that I don't want to. So I would acknowledge that there are some women who treat marriage as a microwave, like I'm in and I'm out. And so this whole concept of women staying while it's toxic for it to keep the family together, I 100% disagree with. However, both you guys had some very valid points, especially pertaining to defining toxicity, because not every conflict is toxic. The challenge is distinguishing between what's a solvable issue and what's actually considered a harmful pattern, right? And sometimes it get lost, i.e. people don't necessarily identify what could be solvable because they're not willing to put that work in to determine if that issue is solvable. So, for example, one of the top reasons for leaving is finances, right? And so if the issue is finances and you never sat together and have this whole budget scheme or have this conversation about how you're going to manage your finances, or you feel that you can't come to an agreement, then it's like, you know what, I'm just going to give up. But how do we know that issue, or how do you know as the person sitting in that relationship that finances isn't something that you could have worked out, depending on, do you need to get a job? Do I need to get a job? Do we need to change our job? Do we need to change from traditional to 50-50, 60-70, or whatever the case may be, or 60-40, or whatever the case may be, because that may be solvable just depending on what the root of that issue is. But however, it's a harmful pattern, such as the person is a gambling addict and they're constantly putting you in extreme debt, and they're, no matter how many times they went to Gamblers Anonymous, they fall off the wagon, and next thing you know, you once again about to be on the verge of being evicted. Well, that's a harmful pattern, and therefore it's toxic. So it's determining those levels to say, okay, now it's time for me to leave. I'm going to say the one thing that really bothered me about this particular clip, or the guy who was speaking against Yada, was that he kept saying, no, you need to pray on it. I feel that religion itself has the community in a chokehold for various, and while the chokehold has lessened to a certain extent today's time, but that chokehold is still there because it was like, oh, you need to pray on it, you need to pray on it. And most women, as you know, in our community, there's a lot of women who go to church and are predominantly the ones in church and to say that they are praying on it. So for those type of women, when they do leave, it's because they have prayed on it. They have sought the community. They have went to their pastor because this guy kept saying, go to your pastor. And because the pastor in the community, and he talked about the whole it takes a village concept, but he talked about it in a way where the village lords over that woman versus the village coming together and being a true village to help each other out. So all I'm saying is that in this way, in this particular case, I agree with most of you guys' points. I 100 believe that we should define what toxicity is. I also agree 100% that toxicity harms the children more than actually helps. Because if I'm constantly seeing my mother being beaten as an example for worst case scenario, then I'm more likely to accept being beaten on if I'm the woman. I'm more likely to accept being the beater because sometimes that pattern tends to repeat itself in their relationships, right? Or they develop harmful styles like self-harming and so forth. So 100% kids start learning dysfunction as being normal versus recognizing its dysfunction. The last thing I would say is that mothers, unfortunately, and I do say unfortunately because I think that fathers should actually have just as much impact as well. But they've done studies that show if the mother stays unhappy, then the household is unhappy. And I think that's actually a disservice to fathers because it takes away the father's portion, his emotional too well-being and so forth. And I believe if both parties are unhappy, then that child is also unhappy. So neither party should stay in an unhealthy relationship. And I will acknowledge that some women, particularly in these times, are more likely to jump because they are told it's okay because they are breadwinners or they're making their own bread or there's nothing necessarily tying them to it. So
Okay, first I agree with Nick. A lot of it was cap. I will say that when people leave, a lot of times they leave, I'm gonna go find my happiness. I'm just not fulfilled here. I just don't feel like myself. I have to go discover. I have to find the bigger me. That is not a toxic thing. That's the person out on fairyland or whatever. That is not something they're doing for their kid. That's something a person's doing for themselves. If a person's really staying for the child, then the decision that's being made is strictly about the happiness of the child, not about how they feel. Men stay in marriages and they get up every morning and they go to work and they come home from work and they do all of the things. And a lot of times they're not happy. Like you said, S&M is happy wife, happy life, right? And the man's narrative is kind of to the side. So this happiness thing or this whatever, like, and even in a unhealthy relationship, even if your relationship is unhealthy, it doesn't mean it can't be fixed, right? If it's dead, Jim, if it's just dead, if there ain't no love there, if it ain't no compassion there or whatever, that's different than unhealthy, right? That's just something that's not even alive. And that is toxic. That's something worth leaving. Now, you said something else I thought was like, whew, huge cap. You said something about women being more forgiving. When the numbers are in, ma'am, that's just not true.
Hold on, hold on,
sir,
hold on,
before we jump
hold on,
there, yes,
hold
sir,
on,
Go ahead.
hold
because I
on.
have some
Go ahead.
pushback too.
Yeah, if you was
Come
gonna
on.
push back and pivot, my brother, you should have told me because I had
Okay.
that little soft ass pushback that you did on S&M was not quite
I got
enough.
pushback
So
too.
yeah, cool.
All
So
right, go
let me
ahead.
push
Go
back
ahead.
then. First of
Push
all,
back.
I'm pushing back on this idea like, oh, men stay because they're comfortable, like as if obligation and duty has no role in that. As if sometimes men are like obliged because we're the ones who made the proposal in the first place. We're the ones who have the responsibility. Oftentimes, we're also the ones who take the blame a lot of times for the relationship not leaving. Like, how often can a man say, I'm going to leave this marriage because I'm just not happy? A nigga would not be able to get that shit off. Right. But a lot of y'all do get that shit off. So I get it. It helps your narrative to say, oh, it's because men are comfortable. Comfortable with what exactly? Right? The responsibility, the bullshit, the nagging. Like if a nigga's not happy, he's still in that home, in the driveway, struggling to get inside the house because he's not happy, but he still has to walk in there. He still has to pay the bills. He still has to fucking show up. Niggas don't get the luxury of being in their feelings as much as y'all do, even if a nigga is going through depression. Right? We don't get that. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, in terms of, oh, because we're comfortable. No, sometimes we just learn to be uncomfortable for the sake of y'all. And maybe you don't get it because you've never had to subjugate yourself to women in general, especially when oftentimes that can be illogical and overly emotional, right? Maybe you don't get that part of it, right? But I absolutely do.